Peter Thiel is, to put it mildly, a bit of an unusual guy. Within the last year alone, he has started a new life for himself in Argentina, bankrolled the inaugural enhanced games that kinda flopped, started talking other billionaires into abandoning the Giving Pledge, published an essay about Watchmen and One Piece, doubled his net worth, whiffed the easiest softball interview question of all time.
You would prefer the human race to endure, right?
I don't know. I would.
And to top everything off, finished a speaking tour in San Francisco and Rome about the Antichrist, and how it is going to take the form of tech regulation, or Greta Thunberg, with, as far as anybody could tell, not a hint of irony. Again, this was all just within the last year. The time management alone would almost be impressive if it wasn't also strange. Now, obviously, thanks to a string of successful businesses and investments into companies like eBay, Palantir, Stripe, DeepMind, Facebook, SpaceX, Bitcoin, and his own venture capital firms, he has built an enormous private fortune alongside deep public connections, which, more than almost anybody else on Earth, has allowed him to indulge these unorthodox hobbies. There is also a good chance that none of this is really news to you anymore, and that's not by accident. Just over the last decade, Thiel has gone from doing everything in his power to keep a low profile out of the public eye to today where he is almost seemingly trying to manufacture outlandish headlines. And all of this raises the obvious question of why? Outside of just putting him in not a particularly flattering public spotlight, these strange antics may genuinely be impacting his underlying business interest. So, what is it exactly that Peter Thiel does? And more importantly, what is it exactly that he wants?
A leak of private information purportedly related to an ultra-secret society called Dialogue, founded by PayPal billionaire Peter Thiel.
If you want to think about the economy of California, in some ways it's analogous to Saudi Arabia.
I will sort of get to it by and by, but
the new experimental culture ideas and values. It's the first program to replace Western culture. It's framed as multicultural.
Diversity is more than just hiring, the extras from the space cantina scene in Star Wars or something like that.
So you can imagine the attention and concern when Thiel decided to hold a series of lectures on the Antichrist.
Alright, so, like always with these videos, it would be a lot easier and a lot more fun to just rattle off examples of bizarre things this guy has said, funded, or supported over his career, because honestly, there is a lot of material to cover there. But for now, I want to, as much as possible, leave the tinfoil hats to the side and just break down what it is his businesses actually do to get a clearer idea of what he actually wants. So from the beginning, Thiel had a complicated childhood moving from Germany to Ohio to South Africa to a, historied city in modern-day Namibia before ultimately settling in California when he was 10. From there, by most accounts, he was a quiet, studious kid that had the grades to get into Stanford, where he founded the Stanford Review, a student publication with a conservative focus. After graduating from the prestigious school, he got a job as a law clerk, then a securities lawyer at Sullivan & Cromwell, then a derivatives trader at none other than Credit Suisse, with the side hustle of writing speeches for Reagan's former Secretary of Education. Outside of just being prestigious roles in their own right, it's worth pointing out that he juggled all these jobs over the course of just 3 years, the only regular jobs that he really ever had. Now, nobody should hold anybody's childhood or early career against them, and the only reason it's really worth discussing at all is to point out that, despite the turbulence, after his 3 years of holding down normal jobs came to an end, he was still ultimately surrounded by family and friends who had the means to invest $1 million with him, at the age of 29, in 1996. That money was the seed capital to establish Thiel Capital Management, a small venture capital firm with the idea of using his financial skills from his short stint on Wall Street, mixed with his Stanford connections to invest in promising startups before the larger VC firms got to them. By most records, this fund didn't really do anything that noteworthy. Its largest documented investment was a web-based calendar developed by one of Thiel's Stanford friends that effectively went nowhere. But the founder of that calendar project connected him with Max Levchin, who had another idea for a company that would use cryptography to secure fully online payments. So yeah, this part of the story you have probably already seen 100 YouTube video essays on, although it tends to get told from the perspective of one of the other founders. Thiel, Levchin, and Nosek started a company called FieldLink with an initial investment of $100,000 from Thiel, of which $35,000 reportedly came directly from Thiel's parents. FieldLink eventually rebranded to Confinity, which launched PayPal, which attracted further investment during the dot-com hype, merged with another online payments company co-founded by Elon Musk, survived the crash, went public in 2002, and by 2003, got bought outright by eBay, giving all of the original co-founders a significant payday. Those co-founders now colloquially go by the name of the PayPal Mafia, because it was a surprisingly large group of people actually involved in starting this business thanks to the mergings, and because almost all of these guys doubled down into building more companies that, love them or hate them, are just as, if not more relevant than PayPal itself. Now, this whole business history is interesting and probably worthy of its own How Business Worked video. But the point is, from here, Thiel got a nice little payday that he almost immediately started on his next projects with. Unlike a lot of the other PayPal Mafia, Thiel didn't really have hard tech skills. And yes, I know the raw engineering skills of someone like Musk are hotly debated, but he did go to school for science, and he also, at the very least, saw himself as a techie engineer, so pursued techie engineering businesses with his exit liquidity. Thiel knew what he was and what he wanted to be: a finance bro. And less than 6 months after wrapping up the eBay sale, he had positioned himself as the money man in 2 new ventures. The first was Clarium, a macro hedge fund loosely based on trading around the idea of peak oil. This actually did pretty well in the run-up to 2008, and at its peak had around $8 billion in assets under management, making him one of the largest hedge fund managers in the world at the time. It didn't fare so well following the global financial crisis though, and a combination of bad bets plus investors pulling their money out to shore up their own businesses meant that the fund shut down in 2011. Although a standard management and performance fee structure still probably made Thiel a decent amount of money while it existed. Now, at almost exactly the same time he was setting up his hedge fund, he also co-founded Palantir Technologies. The original thesis behind this business was that PayPal actually had really good fraud detection, and it did that by harvesting big data and processing it with well-engineered algorithms, so in the early 2000s, he thought the same kind of big data processing could be expanded to combat, well, basically everything. About 15 months after starting these 2 businesses, he also made a $500,000 angel investment into an up-and-coming social network called The Facebook, in addition to buying Zuckerberg a car and providing him personal mentorship. As if he didn't have enough on his plate, less than a year later, he launched Founders Fund alongside 2 fellow PayPal co-founders and Sean Parker, better known as Justin Timberlake from that movie. This was a venture capital firm that invests in early-stage companies, waits for them to grow, and then cashes out at a higher price. So yeah, as far as the villain origin story goes, this was, all things considered, pretty boring. He had a wealthy family that funded a startup that got lucky, and then reinvested those early winnings into a venture capital firm to recompound his wealth. Throw a rock at a San Francisco TED Talk, and you will hit 20 people with effectively the same backstory. Also, for what it's worth, hot take alert here, but a lot of his early investments were based on some pretty decent ideas. Founders Fund in particular was launched with a manifesto, which is not a great sign, but it did make a good point, which is that tech investment had become too focused on things that could be flipped for a quick profit, rather than building genuinely innovative new technologies. Thiel concluded the reason for this was because world-changing new technologies were hard, while making some new app or platform was easy. They capped it off by saying that we were promised flying cars, instead we got 140 characters. They also went on to point out that not everything with a plug is technology. I mean, take the logo off it and maybe don't call it a manifesto, and honestly, it wouldn't be that different from half the stuff we talk about on this channel every other week, which does make me feel some kind of way. But it's time to learn How Money works to find out how an idealistic tech investor became one of the most powerful, dangerous, and strange men in the world. This video is sponsored by Saley. If you have ever been stuck abroad with no internet and no way to call anyone, Saley is the fix. It is an eSIM app that gives you affordable data plans in over 200 destinations worldwide, no physical SIM card required. You download an app, pick your plan, and you are connected the moment you land. And Saley just added something I've been waiting for: instant phone numbers. You can activate a real US number right in the app, use it for calls and text while you travel, and keep your personal number private. One tap, no contract, no extra SIM. Plans are flexible for every budget, from a few gigabytes to unlimited data, and setup takes minutes. You install the eSIM profile once through the app, and it activates automatically when you reach your destination. Saley also comes with built-in security that blocks malicious sites, trackers, and ads as you browse, which actually helps you use less data while you are abroad. Whether it's a business trip or a vacation, Saley covers you in over 200 destinations at a fraction of what roaming charges would cost. They even have plans for cruise ships now. Download the Saley app or go to saley.com/howmanyworks and use code HowManyWorks for an exclusive 15% discount on your data plan. Scan the QR code on screen to get started. Okay, so one thing to know about Thiel is that he never really stopped creating new funds. There are serial entrepreneurs that normally have some kind of early success and then go on to spend their entire career founding new businesses over and over again. And there are venture capitalists that fund those new businesses. But Thiel sort of became a serial venture capitalist, creating a long list of funds to invest into businesses based on different ideas he had. Now, none of these are public because they don't need to be. But of the ones we know about, there are at least a dozen venture capital firms and other investment vehicles that he has co-founded with various people specializing in different areas of tech. After his hedge fund closed down in 2011, he started Mithril Capital to invest in more mature companies, relaunched Thiel Capital as a family office to manage his other investments, and co-founded the America's Frontier Fund alongside Eric Schmidt, the former Google CEO. He has made co-investments into everything from a hedge fund run by Joshua Kushner, Jared's little brother, to a crypto investment fund alongside Mark Cuban, a communications company alongside Jeffrey Epstein, and he was also one of the early investors into Reddit alongside Sam Altman, Jared Leto, and Snoop Dogg. He also started Valor Ventures, a VC firm focused on companies outside of Silicon Valley, Crescendo Equity Partners, a private equity firm focused on Asian markets that he started alongside his husband, Matt Danzisen, and then so many Rivendell companies. Basically, if he needs a shell company, he just calls it Rivendell something. That includes his personal Roth IRA fund, which he used to make early investments into Palantir and Facebook, and which he grew from a $1,700 contribution in early 1999 to roughly $5 billion inside of a tax-sheltered vehicle that was designed for middle-class retirement savings. So the lesson from all of this is that his business ever since exiting PayPal has really just been having money and having the right connections to scale companies along to the next buyer. Also, to play devil's advocate a bit, with that many fingers in that many pies, with that many other major public figures, invariably there are going to be some skeletons, even before considering his own personal agenda, which, gets a little bit harder to defend. Now, these businesses have always had a combination of philosophy mixed with commercial interest. Founders Fund thought that technology wasn't pushing us into the future. His hedge fund was based on the thesis of peak oil. All of the Lord of the Rings companies are based on investing in some interpretation of the future. And by itself, that's not unusual. Most investment firms have some kind of thesis about how they look at the market differently, and most of the time it's just branding to tell investors how they're going to beat the boring index fund. But over time, Thiel's investments have slowly shifted from being primarily motivated by finding returns to arguably more motivated by forwarding a very specific worldview. Founders Fund is really just a venture capital firm that thinks it can beat the market by investing in the hard stuff that nobody else in Silicon Valley is brave enough to pursue. To date, the firm manages roughly $17 billion in assets. America's Frontier Fund is slightly more ideological and wants to bring tech manufacturing back to America to stem the power of China. But realistically, this could also make some money. But then there are investments like Pronomus, a venture capital firm founded by Patri Friedman. Fun fact, the grandson of Milton Friedman, the libertarian economist, that is about pushing the idea of semi-autonomous tech-forward cities. Even if these were successful, it is unclear how they would provide a return to their investors. So this is arguably much more motivated by Thiel's ideology of libertarian cities and limiting government controls. This has also extended to Praxis, a smaller organization that Thiel has heavily invested in that wants to establish an independent internet-native nation with a future-forward city outside of the direct influence of any existing nation-state. The company has reportedly raised over $525 million from investors. Now, this is a wild enough idea by itself, but some of the influences shaping the objectives of Praxis have, generously been described by outlets like the New York Times as a little bit fascist. One of the co-founders of this particular project talked of wanting to establish a non-US city as a place for tech elites to go to if the US political environment became less tech-friendly. Now today, our tech leaders accompany the president on diplomatic missions, stand in front of the cabinet at inauguration, and pretty openly float the idea of government co-investment. So with all of that in mind, you might reasonably think that the US political environment has arguably never been more tech-friendly. Thiel would disagree. Largely in response to proposed wealth tax measures in California, he has, as of about 10 months ago, taken up primary residency in Argentina, but the move also came with some other advantages. The country's president, Javier Milei, shares his libertarian ideologies, and the two are reportedly working closely on business and technological partnerships, so it's not unreasonable to think that he wants to develop one of his tech cities down in Argentina. Another noted advantage of the move is that Argentina is a geographically isolated and resource-rich country, so in the event of the AI apocalypse, it would make a great doomsday bunker location. Now, you might remember that Thiel already fast-tracked New Zealand citizenship, where he reportedly also has a doomsday bunker that he and Sam Altman were going to share the end times in. So, Argentina is kind of the backup to the backup. But to be fair, this move is not without precedent. About 80 years ago, there was another group of Argentine immigrants that also moved to the country to avoid political... Alright, moving on. So yeah, Thiel has made more money and developed more contacts. His objectives pretty clearly shifted from just making even more money to advancing his own ideologies under the guise of investing in the future. This also included very heavy spending on politics, including $15 million on J.D. Vance when he was running for senator in Ohio, the largest single donation to a Senate candidate in American history at the time. Now again, to be fair, political spending from wealthy individuals is objectively extremely common, and we did a whole video on it. But Thiel's super PAC, Protect Ohio Values, went slightly further than just running ads. They reportedly uploaded voter data to an obscure blog for Vance's team to stumble upon rather than handing it over directly, which would have broken the arm's distance rule of super PACs. This was challenged for being a pretty blatant flouting of the rules, but the case was ultimately dismissed. Beyond politics, he has also always had a very complicated relationship with the media. Before the 2020s, he actually tried to remain very private, doing most of his business and ideological work behind the scenes. This was kind of derailed by an article from the publication Gawker, which outed him as gay back in 2008. Now, to be fair, that was kind of a dick move, especially since at the time, Thiel wasn't a particularly notable public figure. He did not like this one little bit. In response, he personally financed the lawsuits of several people who were suing Gawker, most notably Hulk Hogan, with the eventual end goal of bankrupting the outlet entirely. A jury awarded Hogan $140 million in 2016, and Gawker filed for bankruptcy shortly after. Of course, by this point, thanks to the media circus and his growing wealth tied to major companies, he was in the media whether he liked it or not. Now, the irony in all of this is that Thiel also co-founded Palantir, which is a company built on compiling privacy-violating information about everybody. The US government alone paid them $687 million in the first quarter of this year for exactly that kind of work. And then, literally as we were putting this video together, Thiel and Enhanced Games founder Aaron D'Souza made another move to shake up the journalism industry by launching Objection, a company that uses AI to evaluate journalists' claims and which offers a service where for $2,000 anybody can dispute a story, whereby the journalist's claims get scored by a panel of AI models, which isn't at all dystopian. Now, all of these battles kind of had a Barbra Streisand effect, where they put him further into the public spotlight, and now he is kind of just embracing it. Today, he speaks very openly, is very upfront with his politics, and even his more outlandish ideologies. He came up through Silicon Valley in the early 2000s and the 2010s, where these kinds of ideas would have been very against the grain and probably cost him major partnerships, investments, and opportunities. And well, it arguably still does. Venture capitalists need promising founders with ideas just as much as founders need venture capitalists with money. There are a lot of potentially promising entrepreneurs that just simply would not want to work with Peter Thiel or any of his several funds because of his controversial views. What's more is that this is potentially even having an impact on his existing businesses. Palantir does most of its work with governments, and well, at least some of those governments are beholden to their people. Thiel is a German citizen, and he is still having trouble with his German drone company because the government is uneasy about his political positions. This is costing him real money and real opportunities. So, why not just shut the f*** up? His life would arguably be a lot easier and his businesses a lot less scrutinized if he didn't go out of his way to look like a supervillain, right? But the boring reality is that he has more money than he will ever spend, and he seems to genuinely think he can convince people that his ideas have their best interests at heart. To that end, and in anticipation of some pushback, he has also engineered his entire portfolio, and life for that matter, to be extremely robust. He has multiple citizenships in Germany, the United States, and New Zealand, and he also applied for a passport in Malta in 2022. He has structured companies specifically incorporated and diversified across the planet, and he has an extensive network and friends in very high places. He is also not tied to a single business like almost every other billionaire at his level. Someone like Zuck, Bezos, Ellison, or even Musk are, for better or worse, poster boys for their companies. Most people would have no clue what Thiel is actually invested in, and even with all of this background, his private holdings are private, so we probably don't know the full extent of where his money is. Yeah, sure. He is associated with Palantir, which is almost certainly by far his largest asset at a roughly $9 billion stake. but nobody thinks that is a nice company. Its value isn't going to drop because of bad PR. If anything, leaning hard into the skullcap baddie Bond villain thing kind of cements what the company does to a lot of investors, and average people aren't their customers anyway. So he can get away with saying whatever he wants without the same vulnerabilities that other major business leaders have. It just so happens that what he wants to say is kind of a bit out there. Also, for what it's worth, he probably misses out on a lot of SoCal soy boy founders that believe in nonsense things like humanity's continued existence. But for a lot of founders that want to pursue less PC initiatives like nuclear tech, weapons, or big data harvesting, he is the first person they will go to. Which means, again to play devil's advocate, saying wild things that makes headlines is good marketing for his core businesses, which is investing money into companies that put returns over traditional ethics. Now, it is almost impossible to cover this guy without simultaneously sane-washing him and going down a conspiracy rabbit hole at the same time. Obviously, he is not advocating for a future where regular people come out on top, and he isn't really even trying to hide that. But arguably, the bigger problem is that people with this much money can have so much influence to begin with. Now, if you want to see all of these systems actually put to work, go and watch this video next to find out how money and politics made this a truly unsolvable problem. And don't forget to like and subscribe to keep on learning how money works.